Hello, everybody. Good day, good evening to everyone, and welcome back to the Ask Abhijit show. I hope you are all doing great. It's been a while. I was not here for a while. Last weekend, I wasn't there, but we're back. We're back, and it's so good to be among you all. So, I'm going to take questions about history today. I'm going to take questions that you have asked in the comments. I'll take as many of these as possible. Before I do that, let me see who all is there on the live chat and greet some of you. I can see Nagendra Adiga, Ayush Singh, Shubh Nationalist, Ankita, Stone, Chat DSP, Manhattan, Vikash PJ, Super Rex, Vidhi Maniar, hello, Random Skull, hello, Arhan Sutaria, hello, Vikash PJ, namaste, Mr. 88ers, good evening, Adi Trivedi, Anant Bharadwaj, Sumit Agarwal, Avinash, Ashwani, Sagar Ghare, Namaskaram, Ultimate Power, Shubh Nationalist, Mr. 88ers, Geopolitical Dubai, good to see you, sir. Chaitanya Manuja, Ayush Singh, Ramesh Murugaya. Geopolitical Dubai is here from Indore. I'm a painter, good to see you. Super Rex, hello. Stone. Somi Jain is also here from Jaipur. Super Rex, Bhaskar Kayatwal, Stone, Ashwani. Okay, we are repeating a few names here. Let's get on to some new ones. Suresh Sadwani, DJ Divine Joy, Paritosh Sharma, Parth, Event Countdown, Dhruv Yadav, Thanks, Saurav Narayan, Unknown Road Stocks, Subit Agarwal, Chandrasekhar, Anuj Art, Divyanshu Singh, The Seeker, Hensi Penguin. Emergency episode soon. We'll see about that if there's an emergency. Swapnil Saxena, Nikesh Dahal, Santosh Rana, Mai Hihu. Okay, Vikash. Saurav Narayan, Priyanka Javalia. Hello, Freedom from Outcome is here from Canada. Good morning to you. Dhruv Yadav, Jagdish Mali. Hello. Ojaswit Kumar, long time no see. Well, we are back. We're back. Feminist Slayer. Hello. Niranjan, Silent Viewer. Silent Viewer. Hello. Bhushan, Namaskar. Saral Sharma, DJ Divine Joy, SKR, Nikita Vashisht, The Seeker, Sumit Agarwal, Avinash Rao, Sharva, Khandangale, Just Some Nut, Arhan Sutaria. Who else? God was alive. Well, God was alive. Good to see that. Mihir Kulkarni, Matt Reddy, McLevin. Hello, DJ Divine Joy once again. 142 Yadnesh Potdar, Himanshu Rajpurohit, Sharat, Bandekar Bhauji, Akash Jayavant, Mehul Sharma, Mihir Kulkarni, Mr. Saxena, Ayush Yadav, Pamel Nandi. Good to see you, sir. And everyone else. S. Kala, Jami Parth, Jagdish Mali, Sharat, Adil Bains. All right, let me stop greeting you all, otherwise it will go on forever. Let's take some questions. Nikita says, what about a space special? Would you like me to do a space special one of these days? An episode only devoted to space, the mysteries of space, the mysteries of the universe. Maybe we'll talk about aliens. Would you like that? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the live. I won't be able to see the live chat right now, but let me know in the comments. If it's something you want, I will be very happy to do that. It's one of my, but possibly my most favoritist of topics. I'll be happy to do it. Okay, so let's get going with the questions. What questions have I selected? I've selected a bunch of questions. The thing is, you all have asked such incredibly fantastic, wonderful questions that one episode is not enough to field them all, to handle them all. So maybe I'm really tempted to do additional history specials to handle all the questions. Okay, let's get going with the questions. This is not quite a history question, but let's begin with this one. Maybe it will help others also, understand what I am about, what this channel is about. So this is by Alex Martinez, who says that I am a conservative Portlander from Portland, Oregon, and I've been a subscriber to your channel for a few years now. I'm just curious about what political views you share. Are you also conservative? Are you a socialist? Just want to clarify where you stand. Sometimes it gets confusing to depict. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for subscribing from Portland. Good to have you. And it's a great question. I'm not sure I've ever discussed this. Where do I fit in? So first of all, I don't really fit US party labels. I don't map neatly into American labels like conservative or socialist or right or left. I don't really fit into these things. Some people would say that I'm an Indian nationalist. I've seen people, on Reddit or whatever, talking about that I'm an Indian nationalist. Some people depict me as a Hindu nationalist. What exactly am I? Uh, I would say I am an Indian civilizationalist. I'm a civilizational realist. I believe in realism. You have to be realistic about the world. So I am a civilizational realist. I am not partisan. I don't necessarily support a specific party, a specific person. I support India. I support Indian civilization. So, and how do I judge ideas? How do I judge ideas, essentially? I judge them based on whether they strengthen or harm India's sovereignty, India's competence, India's long term prosperity, India's prospects for self determination long term, India's long term national interest, India's long term cultural and civilizational interest. I judge ideas based on whether they strengthen or harm India's cultural resilience, cultural continuity, civilizational continuity, civilizational resilience. So essentially, I am biased towards India. See, a lot of people will say that they are neutral. I give you a neutral perspective. I will not say that. Each one of us has some inherent biases within ourselves. And I am aware of that. The fact that I also am biased, I am biased towards India, the civilization state. That's what I'm biased towards. So that's how I evaluate ideas. That's how I judge ideas. How do I judge or evaluate policy? It's a simple test. Does a policy increase India's power, India's resilience, India's freedom of action, India's civilizational and cultural interests and continuity over decades, not the next 3 weeks, next 3 months, right? That sort of thing. And what do I value? Is this not necessarily political values, but what do I value overall? I value free inquiry. Yes, I am aware that free speech and free inquiry should be there, and I'm aware that they have limitations in a real world. That's called being realistic. But I do value free inquiry. I am all about evidence first, labels second, right? And if evidence changes, then if the data changes, then my perspective also changes. I'm open to changing my perspective based on new data, new evidence. I value merit, which means that I'm opposed to never-ending affirmative action. I'm opposed to never-ending reservations in India. I value strong defense for India. I value resilience, resilient supply chains. I value India's growth. I value technological leadership. And of course, I value India's culture and civilization. And I am very skeptical of imported ideologies and that sort of thing, right? So based on all of this, there is some overlap between where I stand and where American conservatives will stand. Yeah, on national strength, on deterrence, on maybe cultural continuity, cultural values, or whatever that is, right? So there'll be some overlap there, but there's going to be an overlap with others also. Uh, you know, based on maybe industrial policy, technology, etc. So that's kind of where I stand. I am an Indian civilizationalist. I am a civilizational realist, and I am not necessarily partisan. I don't necessarily support one person, one party, whatever. I support India. And which India? Not the nation state, the civilization state, of which the nation state is a subset. So of course I support India, the nation, in the shape and form that it does exist today. But broader, from a broader perspective, I support India's civilization. So that's kind of where I stand. Maybe to some extent I'm conservative, but to some extent you could say that I'm very progressive. I'm very liberal. I used to consider myself to be a liberal until I discovered what liberal means in the real world. Right? I'm not that liberal. I do value, different ideas, different viewpoints, different perspectives. I do value plurality, but not the kind of plurality which says that you need to import all, people from all cultures, races, whatever, and put them in one place, in one city, or in one country. Not that sort of thing. I value the beauty and diversity of the world, the plurality of the world, and each culture has its own place in the world. You don't have to mix them all together. That's how I see it. So maybe from that perspective, I may be a little bit liberal, but overall, that's where I stand. I am firmly with India, with Indian civilization and the Indian national interest. So it doesn't fit neatly into left or right in the US, or conservative versus socialist. I definitely am not socialist. I abhor socialism. Some ideas within socialism may make a little bit of sense in some contexts, but overall socialism is bad. It's ruinous, as India knows very well. So yeah, that's kind of where I stand. I hope that clarifies things, maybe to a certain extent at least. Anyway, thank you, Alex. Good to have you, and thank you so much for being a subscriber for several years. I really appreciate that. Right, next question. Nirvana Shanks says, how reliable are historical narratives of conquest and empire, given that most surviving records are produced by the victors? Can we ever reconstruct a truly objective past? You know, it's difficult to construct and to even construct a truly objective present, because even in the context of the present moment right now, this very second, there's like 50 different narratives trying to influence the way you see the world. So each person's worldview, even today, about the way the world is today, is going to be shaped by different narratives, competing narratives. So it's different. It's difficult to even to construct a truly objective present. First of all, let's understand that, because of the power of narratives and propaganda. And when it and you know the great man, Mr. Trump, has introduced this very famous phrase or term, which is called what? Fake news, right? Fake news. Now, if the news is fake, imagine what history is like. Today's news is fake. We know that a lot of it is fake. A lot of it is spun around. A lot of it is narratives. A lot of it is propaganda. So if the news is fake, imagine how history is going to be like. So there's no question about the fact that historical narratives of conquest, empire, just history overall, are unreliable. It's Napoleon, I believe, who said that history is a set of lies agreed upon, isn't it? So historical narratives, whether they are of conquest, whether they are of empire, whether they are of various nations, civilizations, cultures, whatever, these are inherently shaped by the perspectives and intentions of those who recorded them. Okay? And typically those who recorded history, and those records, if they have survived, these typically are the records created by victors, those who won conquest, empire, whatever, right? So these historical narratives, what we call history, these are shaped by the perspectives and intentions of those who won, of the victors, and therefore it's a guarantee that they will present a skewed or selective version of events, of what really happened, of how the world was during that particular period of time, whichever period of time we're looking at. So these historical narratives are influenced by cultural biases, for example, political agendas, power dynamics, and so much more of the victors, of the dominant groups. So let's say you have a conquered territory. Let's talk about, for example, present-day Turkey, right? So who won that? The Turks, who were Central Asian invaders. They conquered this land from the Greeks. What we call Turkey today was historically Greek and Armenian territory. It was the Armenians, and more than the Armenians, the Greeks, who lived in Anatolia, and they coexisted reasonably peacefully. And then you have these invaders who come in and take over the place. And I'll not go into the history, but they, in their version of history is going to be very different from the version of history that the Greeks will put forth, or the Armenians will put forth. I mean, the Turks said that the Armenian genocide never happened. There was no such thing, right? And the Greek genocide, obviously, that also never happened. Before the Armenian genocide, there were multiple waves of Greek genocide, which I'm not sure you will find any of that in world history textbooks, Greek genocide. What about India? What about India? What happened in the past 1,000 years? Right? It's very controversial, and nobody dares to speak the truth. Multiple waves of genocide of Indians, first by the Turks, then by the Europeans. The British engineered hundreds of artificial famines in India. We don't talk about that as a genocide. We say it was the colonial period. It was a period of foreign occupation, British occupation, brutal, barbaric British occupation of India. Can you see the conflicting narratives here? What I am saying is that it is not colonization, it is not a colonial period. It's a period of brutal, barbaric, genocidal foreign occupation. But your history textbooks won't say that. Your teachers won't say that. Your professors won't say that. They'll wax nostalgic about the British Raj, about British colonialism, how the British gave us railways, they gave us the English language, they gave us tea, and they gave us justice, the judiciary, because we were so backward and barbaric that we were living in trees, right, in caves, apparently. So you see, surviving. So the British, what they did is that they wrote the history of India, and that's what's taught and in today's schools and colleges and universities, or various versions of what the British wrote about India, right? Today you will have Indian writers who write about that, but they base all of that on the British writings about India. They have to put references in their texts. The references are all going to, point back to what the British wrote. For example, Satya, all these narratives, right? All these narratives. And when Indian writers write about this to debunk the atrocity literature, then they are tagged. They are labeled as this or that, Indian nationalists or Hindutva revisionists or whatever, right? So what the British wrote about India, what the Turks say about Turkey, what the Americans write about their conquest of the Americas, what the Spanish write about their conquest of the Americas, what the British write about their conquest of Australia, and so much more, what the Arabs write about whatever they did, and so on. All of this is what we can consider to be surviving records of history. And these surviving records, they always reflect the ideology and justifications of the victors. They will glorify the achievements of the victors. They will seek to legitimize the rule of the victors. And they will vilify the conquered peoples, the defeated peoples. And they will downplay all their achievements, if any. Right? And the nations or cultures that have been subjugated, conquered, those accounts, you will find that they are lost. In the case of India, our written records of history are lost. They were burned by the Turks 1,000 years ago. And whatever survived, much of it was destroyed by the British, right? So, or suppressed by the British. So, see, today's India, we imagine it's a free post-independence India, right? We imagine that. There is this great scholar called Dr. B. Bilal, who passed away sadly recently at the age of, nearly 100, hopefully 100. So he's probably the world's greatest archaeologist. Okay. And he was the head of the ASI, and he wrote more than 50 books, articles, whatnot, about the history of India that he uncovered during his archaeological career. More than 50 books and so many papers and whatnot. How many of these books are part of your college or university curriculum today? None of those. How many of Dr. Meenakshi Jain's books are part of your college or university curriculum? None of them, right? So you see, all of this is suppressed. This we are the subjugated. We when it comes to the Turkic and British European perspectives, we are the defeated people, right? We were defeated by them, and our land was occupied by them. So we are the subjugated group, and our accounts will be suppressed. Either they will be destroyed, they will be lost deliberately, or they will be suppressed. And that's how history is. The narrative of history is controlled, right? It is sanitized. And because of this, you'll have massive gaps and asymmetries in the evidence, in the historical record, right? So the official narratives, what we have in our, if we are genuinely independent and so on, why do we have the official narratives that are so anti-India? Why do they not frequently, why do they almost universally omit the genocide, the atrocities, the resistance that we put forth? Why do they omit all of that almost universally? Right? So clearly, historical narratives are extremely skewed, extremely biased. So, how do we mitigate this bias? Right? So, what we can do is we have to compare records from multiple sources. Don't just look at what the British wrote. We have records written by Indians also that are, languishing in various temple repositories. There are languishing in personal family collections. Maybe some universities have them, but they are gathering dust, right? So you have to compare records from multiple perspectives. You have to examine different viewpoints, not just the viewpoint of the oppressor, right? You have to uh, take into account archaeological evidence, because archaeological evidence is hard evidence, right? And you also have to take into account oral traditions. You can't simply disregard oral traditions. Why should we disregard them? If a single person says that this is my oral tradition, you may be skeptical. But if you have an oral tradition that comes forth from a wide area, let's say an entire state like Rajasthan or let's say Haryana or whatever, it's not just one person, but everyone, all the old folks from in this region, they remember these accounts passed on by their ancestors. Well, then that's an oral tradition, and you can't disregard that. You have to put it in the correct context, right? So that's called an interdisciplinary approach. You have to combine historical data, literary data, archaeological data from oral traditions, and by doing that, it's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, and that helps you reconstruct aspects of the past that have been overwritten, that have been deleted, omitted, whatever, or distorted or ignored. That's how we do it. So that's the deal. It is a guarantee that each historian is going to have some biases. Some of them will know that I have this bias, and they will inform the reader that, okay, I've written this, but here are my biases. I am so and so. I'm Indian. This is my religion. I'm Hindu, or I'm Jain, or whatever. And maybe you should be aware of this, so that this, because my background may unknowingly or unknowingly introduce some biases in what I've written. So it's called fair disclosure, right? That sort of thing. So all historians operate within, they bring their own judgments, their own perspectives into their work. They operate within the current contemporary cultural framework, right? And all of this, it inevitably is going to color, to some extent, their interpretation of history. So historians should transparently acknowledge these limitations, these potential uncertainties in what they've written, and potential and definitely the known uncertainties in the available evidence. And that's how you do a fair job, a decent, an honorable job as a historian. But then you ask yourselves, are India's historians doing this, an honorable, fair job of writing history? Some are, but the majority of the so-called Darbari historians, they have been essentially playing the role of Gangadins, brown coolies. Someone once accused me of being racist because I used the term brown coolie. Hey, have you seen the color of my skin? Can you be racist towards yourself, towards your own people? Whatever. That's a different story. We'll not go there. So that is the deal. Historical narratives are extremely unreliable, and they usually reflect the biases and perspectives of the victors. And here's another perspective. Okay, before I end this answer, see, the Vikings, they won a lot of the time. There was an entire Viking age, right, in which they repeatedly raided England, eventually conquered England and ruled England. And they were pretty devastating. They were not big fans of the Christian faith. Okay. And they plundered Christian religious structure. What are they called? Abbeys or whatever, right? They plundered those. They killed the monks, and they did such terrible stuff over there, right? So how come history is not written from the Viking perspective? Good question, perhaps. If they won, why is history not written from their perspective? Because afterwards they lost, and they themselves had to convert to Christianity. So at the end of the day, there was a Viking age, 200 plus years, in which they were supremely, supremely successful, but eventually they lost, and they themselves had to convert to Christianity. And then it is the Christians who proceeded to write the history of the Viking age. That's how things go. Okay. Rohan BD says, a couple of episodes ago, you elaborated on the details of the Ashwamedha yagna. I'm currently reading the Mahabharata Sanskrit Hindi edition by Gita Press, considered to be the most authentic version of the epic. And I can confirm everything you said about the yagna. In particular, the animal sacrifice. That was spot on. More than 300 animals were sacrificed in Yudhishthir's Ashwamedha yagna, including the horse that ran across kingdoms. Its body is cut into pieces and its fat is boiled in the ritual. For those who are interested, further details can be found in chapters 88 and 89 of the Anugita Parva, Volume 6. I'm glad to have found a channel which tells it like it is, no sugarcoating, no BS. Been following you since your first book recommendations video when you had short hair. Ron BD, thank you so much for being one of the earliest viewers of this channel and for sticking with the channel with me. I really, really appreciate that. I'm very grateful to you and others like you. I'm very grateful to all the viewers of this channel for all your support, for your viewership. And when it comes to what you're saying about the Ashwamedha Yagna, more than 300 animals were killed. Well, this will make a lot of today's Indians super uncomfortable. Many of my viewers right now are perhaps feeling very upset about this, maybe feeling angry about this. Maybe some of them are wondering whether the translation is correct or whether somebody has distorted the translation, right? The past was a long time ago. We are talking about an event that happened several thousand years ago. If you read the Rig Veda, does it say that you should be vegetarian? Does it extol the virtues of vegetarianism? It does not, FYI. Okay, and if you look at the Indian epics, our great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, you will have references to animal sacrifices, to animals being consumed, etc. So your ancestors had a different lifestyle from yours. The core values of our culture and civilization haven't changed, but some things have changed. And I suppose in that episode, I explained how this transition happened from India being a primarily meat-eating society several thousand years ago to transitioning towards being a predominantly vegetarian society about 2,500 years ago, because of the sudden and inorganic upsurge or rise in Buddhism in India. The sudden spread of Buddhism in India. It did not spread naturally or organically. It spread artificially. Buddhism was essentially, thrust onto the masses artificially. By whom? By the great man himself, Emperor Ashok, not Akbar, Ashok. He did that. Buddhism was an obscure branch of the dharmic umbrella, of the dharmic tree. And Ashok, for political reasons, decided to promote Buddhism to the high heavens. And that's how Buddhism became a big deal. And then the Buddhists started accusing, non-Buddhists of being animal killers, especially Brahmin priests, etc., of being animal killers. You guys sacrifice animals in your yagnas, you are monsters. Because of that, for tactical reasons, Brahmins decided that we will become completely vegetarian. The Buddhists were still meat eaters to some extent. They did not do yagnas, but they were meat eaters. The Brahmins said, we will do better than you. We will become completely vegetarian. And that's how Hindus started becoming vegetarian. Eventually, Hinduism made a comeback, the main Hindu Dharma. But there was a period of several centuries when both the Dharma was the majority was practiced by the majority of Indians. I'm sure we all have ancestors about 2000 plus years ago who practiced Buddhism, both the Dharma. But we reverted eventually to the broader aspects of what we now call Hindu Dharma. But that came with the baggage of vegetarianism. And that's how we became like all ahimsa, all vegetarianism, and so on. And maybe it wasn't the best thing to happen to us, perhaps. I'm sure a lot of you will disagree. And then that's fine. That's fine. Please feel free to disagree. We can have different perspectives, but still be on the same boat and still go in the same direction. We should be comfortable with disagreeing with each other on these smaller matters. All right. Next question. Shubh says, how did South Korea become a vassal of the United States? And both the Dharma or Buddhism, so-called Buddhism, how was it wiped out from South Korea? Didn't the South Koreans resist this, the wiping out of the indigenous culture and religion, Buddhism? So this all goes back to the Korean War. Now let's discuss the Korean War, and we will then discuss what happened to Korea as in the aftermath of the Korean War. So the Korean War, so in 1945, let's start there. In 1945, the Second World War ends. Let's take a look at the map of the Korean Peninsula, and we shall base our discussion on that. First, let's orient ourselves. So let us go eastwards from India, and over here we have the Korean Peninsula, which is now divided into North Korea and South Korea. The 38th parallel, if you put a marker here, it's going to say 38 point something, right? That's the 38th parallel latitude, and that's the de facto border between North and South Korea. So what happened is that in 1945 the Second World War ended with the two nuclear tests on the people of Japan by the United States. Germany had been defeated a few months before, so the Second World War ends. At this time, who's the ruler of the USSR? It is Joseph Stalin. And at this time, what's the situation in China in 1945? Civil war between the communists and the Kuomintang. The communists are led by Mao Zedong, and the Kuomintang is led by Chiang Kai-shek. Okay, that's the deal. So when the Second World War ended, the Korean Peninsula was divided into two halves: North Korea, which was entrusted to the USSR, and South Korea, which was let's say entrusted, maybe not the right term, but you get the point, which was entrusted, South Korea, to the United States. Okay, and at this point in time in 1945, the two nations, the US and USSR, are allies. So North Korea is in the hands of USSR, South Korea is in the hands of the US, and they said that okay, and they divided this along the 38th parallel roughly, or maybe that happened later. We can look into the exact chronology. And the peninsula it was decided it would be reunited after discussions. But then the Cold War starts, and the US and the USSR become adversaries very rapidly. By roughly 1950, the USSR becomes a nuclear weapons power. So it kind of establishes some kind of equality to some extent with the United States, and the USSR is a Eurasian empire. Essentially, the US is a different kind of empire. So then, North and South Korea, they are in the hands of rivals, of enemies, essentially. And by 1949, what happens? The communists win in China, and Mao Zedong is victorious, and they established, the republic, whatever it's called, China, Zhongguo. Now, at this time, North Korea was ruled by Kim Il-sung, and South Korea had some puppet ruler of the US. These are both puppets. Kim Il-sung is the puppet of the USSR, and whoever was ruling South Korea was a puppet of the US. Now, Kim Il-sung, he is emboldened by the communist victory in China. North of China, you have the USSR, which is also communist. So Kim Il-sung says that let us make the whole of Korea communist and let's attack South Korea. So the USSR says, okay. Stalin says, okay, do it, but take Mao's permission. If he's okay with the plan, I will give you the green flag. Yeah. So Kim Il Sung speaks to Mao, and Mao says, "Okay, go ahead. Let's make the whole of South Korea communist." And Kim Il Sung invades South Korea. The USSR gives North Korea MiG-15 fighter planes and arms, ammunition, but does not send soldiers. Stalin refused to send soldiers, but gave all of these supplies, military supplies, powerful military weapons to North Korea. And the Chinese, they sent soldiers disguised as, not official Chinese soldiers, but in some other guise. And you have, in 1950, the war breaks out. North Korea invades the South. And then in 1950 and 1951, these 2 years, there's the seesaw battle across the Korean Peninsula. There is a point of time when the South Koreans are almost wiped out. Then the Americans come into the picture. They send large amounts of troops. Eventually, the Americans sent about 300,000 troops, American soldiers, into the Korean War. And the Americans come into the picture. Then the South Koreans start advancing, and North Korea is almost wiped out. Then they resurge again with the help of the Chinese. The Chinese soldiers come into the picture, and there's this seesaw battle. Seesaw battle happens in 1950, 1951. By 1952 or something like that, what happens is that the war becomes a long war campaign, a slow war, long war scenario, like what you have in Ukraine right now. So after 1951, you have the two North and South Korea. They're fighting each other like they used to fight in the First World War. Trench warfare, massive charges, tremendous casualties, that sort of thing. And it becomes kind of a frozen conflict. Then around 1953, Stalin dies. And then Nikita Khrushchev says that we need to extricate ourselves from this imbroglio. And then you have negotiations happen, and eventually ceasefire is agreed upon, armistice of some kind. And the line is drawn at the 38th parallel roughly, and it became the ceasefire line. There was this no man's land kind of thing constructed, which is like 3-4 kilometers wide, and the so-called demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. Okay. Now, and so that's how the war ended without ending, because there was no official end to the war. It is still, the two nations are still in a state of war, but it's a ceasefire kind of situation since 1953 approximately. So that's what happened in the Korean War. And that's how North as well as South Korea were devastated. Approximately 10 to 15% of the population of the Korean Peninsula, died, which is disastrous for any nation, right? So at the end, so when the Korean War begins, okay, South Korea probably had a population of about 20 million. I'm not sure about the North Korean population. So the Korean War began in 1950. At that time, South Korea had a population of approximately 20 million. And 10 to 15% of those people died, which is about 2 to 3 million. Let's say 3 million South Koreans died. That is devastating. Okay. Now, when the war ended, the Americans established a large number of military bases. They had already established during the course of the war a large number of military bases in South Korea, and those remained. So today, you have more than 80, you could say, active or permanent American military bases in South Korea. And the largest American military base outside of the US is Camp Humphreys, which has about, I don't know, it can hold about 30,000 troops or something, right? So it's not far from Seoul in South Korea. So South Korea was devastated. It was ruined. It was in a state of famine, abject poverty. And then South Korea also becomes a dictatorship. And within a few decades, they set up this big industrial base with the help of the United States. The US did all it could to build up South Korea. South Korea, at that time, its GDP would have been less than 50 million. 50 million, not billion, okay? 50 million. its GDP would have been less than 50 million when the Korean War ended. And today it's in excess of 1.5 trillion. So it's made a huge leap forward. Now, what about the end of Buddhism? So in 1950, what was the percentage of Christians in South Korea? You may have maybe 1.5 million Christians out of the population of 20 million in 1950. That's not a small number, actually. But that 1.5 million in 1950 Christians, it became about 6 million by 1970. Okay, 6 million by 1970. And today it is about 15 million. Or maybe more. So from 1950 to 1970, the population of Christians tripled. From 1970 to 2000, the population of Christians tripled once again. And today, Christians are more than 30% of the South Korean population officially, and Buddhists are about 17% or so. How did this happen is the question. You see, at the end of the Korean War, 1953, South Korea is devastated. It is ruined. It's in abject poverty. So the Christian missionary organizations come into South Korea and they start giving aid to people. They give people rice. They give people shelter. They help people send their kids to Christian schools and so on. But obviously there's a trade-off. Rice isn't free. Yeah, it'll be free, but you have to sell your soul for that. So you have to convert to Christianity. It's the same old story that the Chinese wrote about in the 1850s. China was ruined during those horrible times in China, the Dungan Revolt, and so on. And the evangelists would come into China and offer rice in exchange for conversion. And the Chinese wrote about this, and they called those converts rice Christians. Well, the same strategy was used in Korea as well by the Americans, right? So that is how South Korea not only became a vassal of the US, it also, its indigenous religion was also wiped out. Now, you may say that that Buddhism has come from India. It's not indigenous to South Korea or Korea overall. It's been in Korea for the best part of 2000 years. That makes it indigenous. If it's been in your country for 20 years, it's foreign. If it's been in your country for, let's say, even 1,000 years, if it is being imposed on your country by force, it's foreign. It's invasive. But if the people have willingly adopted it and made it their way of life, willingly, without any coercion, without any force, then it's your culture. So South Korea's native culture, the past roughly 2,000 years, has been Buddhism, and that is now being wiped out. So today Christianity is the majority religion. The rest are apparently atheists. And today you will see South Korean tourists coming into the Indian subcontinent and trying on tourist visas and trying to convert Indians to Christianity. Nepalese also. That's what you see happening. So that is the deal. That is how all of this happened. So the US has more than 80 essentially permanent military bases in South Korea. South Korea is under US occupation since 1953, maybe before that. And that's how South Korea became an American vassal. And that's how Christianity essentially is in the process of wiping out South Korea's indigenous religion, which is Buddhism. All right. Amisha says, what's the reason for Bactria and Margiana as a classification? What's unique about this culture? See, Bactria, Margiana, these are not cultures, these are geographical regions. So let us go to the map and let's figure out what's going on. Okay. Here's the map, and let us move back to the subcontinent. We're talking about the extended neighborhood of the of our subcontinent. So what is Bactria, first of all? So before we discuss Bactria, let us discuss Gandhar to orient ourselves. What is Gandhar, or what was Gandhar historically? Gandhar historically was Afghanistan, what we call today Afghanistan, and also the northwestern part of Pakistan. All of this large region was called Gandhar historically by us, including the ancestors of the Afghans. They were also us. Okay. So that is historically Gandhar, and it was a major center of Indian culture, Vedic culture, and later Buddhist culture. And at various points in time. Gandhar was part of the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire. It was also obviously part of Indian civilization. It was also part of the Mauryan Empire. It was part of the Indo-Greek kingdoms. It was part of the Great Kushan Empire. Later, it became part of the Sasanian kingdoms and so on. Right? So that is Gandhar. Eventually, it came to be known as Swarasthan, which became Khorasan, and then eventually Afghanistan. So that is Gandhar. Now that we understand what Gandhara is, let us discuss Bactria and Margiana. So Bactria is the region, the Greeks gave this name, if I'm not mistaken. And that is the northern half, essentially, of Afghanistan, which also includes Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. So Tajikistan is a small country just northwest of India. And you also have Uzbekistan, which is west of Tajikistan. So Bactria included northern Afghanistan. It also included Tajikistan and parts of Uzbekistan and probably some parts of Turkmenistan also. So that is Bactria. And this was also part of the Indo-Greek kingdoms. Okay, Alexander kind of was in the region briefly. And after the fall of the Seleucid Empire, you had this whole bunch of Indo-Greek kingdoms that popped up in the region. So those were Greeks who had assimilated into Indian society. And so Bactria was the home of multiple Indo-Greek kingdoms. It was also very much part of the great Kushan Empire. And it gave us the great, the Gandhara school of art, the Hellenistic, depictions of Indian culture. And it was a great center of knowledge and learning, and also a great crossroads of trade between India and the West, and also to some extent China. So that is Bactria. Now, what is Margiana? So there is something called the Murghab River Oasis. Let's look for that. Murghab River Oasis. Let's look for that. It is in Turkmenistan. Now let's zoom out. Right? So it is in present day Turkmenistan. And this place, Murghab, was the epicenter or essentially roughly the center of this place, this territory that was called Margiana. Okay. It is not a very large territory, and it was called Margiana. So it kind of overlaps to some extent with northern Bactria. It was a part of the Achaemenid or Achaemenid Empire of Persia. So that essentially is Margiana. It is kind of a subset of Bactria, but it kind of includes regions that are north of Bactria. Then you also have names such as Arachosia. What is Arachosia? So Arachosia is essentially southern Afghanistan. Where is Kandahar? Let's find Kandahar. See Kandahar. So this region called Arachosia was kind of centered around Kandahar. Okay, and it also encompassed various parts of Pakistan as well. So that was Arachosia, and it was essentially named after the river Saraswati. If you distort the name of Saraswati, it somehow transforms into Arachosia. And you also had Khorasan, which is, Afghanistan later became known as Swarasthan, which included present-day Afghanistan, also northeastern Iran, as you see over here, Turkmenistan, the southern part of Turkmenistan, and much of Afghanistan. So that was Swarasthan, which later became Khorasan. And that also was part of the various Persian kingdoms, like the Sasanian kingdoms. So that essentially, it's pretty confusing, I understand, but these are the various names that have been given to our extended neighborhood, including territories that were once part of Indian civilization. So that is Bactria Margiana, and there you have this BMAC, Bactria Margiana Archaeological Complex, which is this set of ancient ruins that you find there, and you have supposedly a culture which was separate from ours over there, and that has some connotations and some alleged implications for the Aryan invasion or migration myth. So anyway, that's about Bactria and Margiana. Amisha also asks, what happened to the Greeks of Bactria? And when did the last Hellenes or Greeks die out? So we discussed Bactria, which is northern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan also. So, and that's where you had the Indo-Greek kingdoms, which also encompassed, northwest India, Pakistan, etc. So, what happened to these Greeks? Where did they go? When did the last Greeks die out? Because today, if you look at northern India, western India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, you don't see any Greek people there. You see some people who have blonde hair and blue eyes, and are they Greeks? I mean, go to Greece. How many blonde and blue-eyed Greeks do you see in Greece? Most Greeks have dark hair and brown eyes. So if you find some people, small, tiny populations here and there, in Swat, in Chitral, in some parts of Afghanistan, who have blonde hair and blue eyes, it is not a connection to Greece. Okay, first of all, that. So those are not the descendants of the Indo-Greeks. The question is, what happened to the Indo-Greeks? When did they die out? Because we don't find any of them in northern India. I mean, let's call it northern India. What happened to them? So remember, the Indo-Greeks are called the Indo-Greeks. They were not Greeks, they were Indo-Greeks. What does the Indo-Greek mean? It means that they had assimilated into Indian society, culture, and civilization. They had become culturally Indian. And more than that, they would have married among the locals. For example, we have the great king Menander, who was a great scholar of the Vedas, who later allegedly converted to Buddha Dharma, Buddhism. His capital was Shakala, present day Sialkot. Where is Sialkot? Let us find Sialkot. Let's go to the map once again. Where is Sialkot? Where is Sialkot? It's somewhere in here we have it. It's not far from Jammu. So he had a big kingdom. He eventually made a march on Patliputra, Menander. And eventually it is said that he allegedly converted to Buddhism. But he was, I mean, if you think I'm making it up, let's see. I don't know what Wikipedia says about him. Let us see what Wikipedia says about him. Okay, Menander the First. Okay, great king, patron of Greek Buddhism, blah blah blah, etc. King of Bactria, Ravi River, Helmand province, all that. Yeah, his coins, Milindapana. The questions of the Milindapana is this apocryphal Buddhist text. I'm not even sure if we can trust that text, because if you see his coinage, you don't see much Buddhism in his coinage. It is said that the Kushans were Buddhists, right? Before I go into this, it is alleged that the Kushans, our great emperors, were Buddhists. It is said that Kanishka was a Buddhist, right? There is a tremendous quantity of Kushan coinage that has been discovered. Gold coinage, bronze coinage, etc. coinage. And on Kushan coins, you typically have on one side of the coin, you have an image of the king doing something great. On the other side of the coin, you have a god, a deity. And there's a tremendous quantity of Kushan coinage that exists in various museums and private collections and smuggled collections and whatnot. If you do a statistical analysis of the Kushan coinage, less than 1% of Kushan coins have the Buddha or Buddhist imagery. So how can you allege or claim that the Kushans were Buddhists? Similarly, there is a big question about Menander as well, but that's a different story. So Menander, Buddhist construction, Milindapanha, Buddhism, etc. Menander the Just. Does it say here that he was a Vedic scholar? Ved, Veda, 4 Vedas. There you have it. So there you go. So the great man, he knew the Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshik systems of philosophy, arithmetic, music, medicine. So he was a learned person. Magic spells, apparently. The Vedas, the Puranas, the Itihasas, astronomy, magic, the art of war, poetry, and so much more. So Menander, my point is not about the alleged conversion to Buddhism or not. My point is Menander was Indian. He may have had Greek ancestry. Maybe he was full-blood Greek himself. But he was Indian culturally and civilizationally. And these Greeks, these Indo-Greeks, they married among Indians. So Greek ladies would have married Indian men, and Greek men would have married Indian ladies. So what happens then eventually? They assimilate into the local population. Eventually, after like 5, 10 generations, you can't tell anymore whether they have Greek ancestry or not. They did not die out. They simply faded into the population. They assimilated into the population. They intermarried into the population. And after multiple generations, no one could tell who was of Greek origin, who was not. That is what happened. They did not die out, or they did not go back to Greece after the kingdoms are gone. No, they just stayed there. So if you do a sampling, perhaps genetic sampling of people in northern and western India, including Gandhar and Pakistan, you may discover fractional Greek ancestry, 1%, 2% Greek ancestry among various people. But you will not be able to tell by looking at them, right? You won't. That's what happened to the Greeks of Bactria. Right. Rahul Dunake says, who was morally correct in the Trojan War? Was Hector more moral than Achilles, as Hector was defending his city and the Greek Achilles was invading it? Very interesting question. First of all, let's go to the map. Did this Trojan War actually happen? Or is it a myth? Well, it actually happened. It happened around the 12th or 13th century BC. Where did it happen? I can tell you where it happened, because the site of Troy has been discovered. It is currently in Turkey, in western Turkey, not far from Smyrna. I refuse to call Izmir. I call it Smyrna. So, where is Hisarlik? Hisarlik, Turkey. Turkey, there we go. And zoom in. So let's zoom out first and let's see where it is. Hisarlik. All right, it's here. Okay, it's not very close to Izmir, but apparently this is where Hisarlik is. And if you look at so Hisarlik is the actual archaeological site of Troy. And this is, I'm sure there's the archaeological site somewhere here. It's all in Turkish, so I can't really make out what it says. Elementary school, Hisarlik, Troy. Let's see. Troy. Will this? Okay, it's somewhere here. Okay, so you have an archaeological site that has been discovered, which definitely has been identified as the site of Troy. I'm very skeptical it will be like hundreds of kilometers inland. As far as I know, it's somewhere here in this region. Well, let's see if we just look for Troy archaeological site. Okay, I think for some reason it won't show us what we're looking for. That's okay. The point is, Troy has been discovered. The archaeological site of Troy has been discovered. It is in western Turkey. Okay, and the Trojan War, based on archaeological evidence of battles and burnt out structures and so on, it most likely happened in somewhere around the 12th or 13th century BC, in the Bronze Age. Now, what caused the Trojan War? Let's discuss that. What caused the Trojan War? So there's a mythological element to it, and maybe there's a different element to it as well. The mythological element says that there were 3 Greek goddesses who were unable to agree who was the fairest of them all, who was the most beautiful among the 3 of them. It was Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. These 3 goddesses, they had this disagreement. Each said, I am the prettiest, I am the most beautiful. So they decided that they will appoint an impartial adjudicator. And that was Paris, the Prince of Troy. So there was this golden apple that they gave him. It's called the apple of discord. And so Paris, who was the Prince of Troy, was chosen to decide, to judge who was the most beautiful of these 3 goddesses. And he said that Aphrodite is the fairest and most beautiful of these 3 goddesses. So Aphrodite obviously was very pleased with him, and she promised him that he would gain the love of the world's most beautiful woman, who was Helen. Helen of Troy. Okay. Helen eventually came to be known as Helen of Troy, but she was the queen of Sparta. She was married to King Menelaus of Sparta. So Paris, he either abducts Helen or maybe he elopes with Helen. So we're not quite sure whether Helen went with Paris willingly or unwillingly. If she went unwillingly, then she was abducted. If she went willingly, then they eloped essentially. So he, let's say, elopes with Helen, who was married to the king of Sparta, King Menelaus, and he takes her to Troy. So Menelaus obviously this is a great insult to him, isn't it? Right? Great insult. I mean, his reputation is ruined. His reputation is on the line. So he then calls upon his brother, Agamemnon, and he calls upon other Greek leaders. He says that we have to recover Helen from across the sea, from Troy. This is a great insult to us, the Greeks. Okay, so they agree. His brother agrees, and the other Greek leaders, they agree. So they assemble a great Greek expedition force, hundreds of ships potentially, and they launch this expedition to conquer Troy. And then there is a great siege of Troy. Troy was on the seashore. Right now it's a few kilometers indoors because coastlines change. This happened almost 3,200 years ago. So they led this Greek expedition. They besieged the city of Troy. There were battles that happened outside the walls of Troy. And eventually, we know after a decade or so, after 10 years of the siege, they eventually succeeded with the help of the Trojan horse. Right? So that is why this war happened, according to mythological accounts, because of the three goddesses and so on. But there could have been geopolitical motives. Maybe Troy was very wealthy. Maybe the Greeks wanted the wealth. Maybe they wanted to control the trade routes that Troy could control from its geographical position. So maybe there is that, but we are given a mythological account because it's very ancient history, right? So Hector is this great defender of the city of Troy, wasn't he? And he is portrayed as this great morally upright man. Because why? Because he defends his city, he defends his people, he also defends his family. Historians and writers, they admire his sense of duty, his sense of self-sacrifice. He's defending Troy for his loved ones, for his people, despite knowing that he faces overwhelming odds, and he is eventually slain by Achilles. So Hector, he embodies great virtues: loyalty, bravery, self-sacrifice, etc. And Achilles, the Greek, why is he fighting? He hasn't come to fight for his family, right? He's fighting for personal glory. He's fighting for expansion, for Greek expansionism, for Greek conquest, right? He's a very proud man. He has this you could say sin from an Abrahamic perspective, Christian perspective, the pride of sin, the sin of the sin of pride. He's also short-tempered, hot-headed. He has rage, he has pride, and he seeks personal glory. More than Greek glory, he seeks personal glory. Sometimes he is unfair, sometimes he is cruel, right? He's egoistic. So Achilles is all about individual greatness, personal glory. He has excessive pride. He is very short-tempered. So obviously, if you compare Hector and Achilles, you would say that Hector is more morally correct or upright. But here's the problem in viewing. Here's the problem in analyzing historical events through the lens of morality. You cannot bring morality and emotions into analyzing what happened and why it happened, and who is right or who is wrong. See, like I say, when I discuss geopolitics, there is no right or wrong in geopolitics. There are winners and losers. Okay? And the world of geopolitics is amoral. There is no place for morality in geopolitics. And what is history? What are historical events? They are yesterday's geopolitics, right? So when we study history, we have to understand motivations. We have to understand causality. We have to understand actions and consequences. That is causality, cause and effect. And we have to understand the context of the actions that were taken. We can obviously look at morality as well, but that's not the correct uh, lens, the ideal lens through which you study history. You don't, you should not judge historical figures based on morality, because what is morality? It is today's ethical standards. But this war happened 3,200 years ago, roughly. It's pretty certain that the ethical standards would have been kind of different at the time. We discussed our history, the Ashwamedha yagna. Yudhishthir did the Ashwamedha yagna. The horse was cut into pieces eventually, and more than 300 animals were sacrificed. You may find it horrifying, but our ancestors did that. So you see, today's ethical standards, where Indians prioritize ahimsa and vegetarianism, they are different from the ethical standards of our ancestors, right? So it is not the, it's not a good practice to analyze historical events and to judge people through the lens of morality. You know, it can offer some interesting insights from today's perspective, but it may distort the realities of that era. It may distort the realities of that society. That society would definitely have had a different set of moral, different set of morals and ethics. It will oversimplify things if we apply morality. So when we study history, we look at facts, we look at actions, we look at consequences, we look at cause and effect. We try and understand the context in which the actions happened, and we stay away from moralizing and judging people. And that's how we should study history. But obviously, that's not the way it's always done. And when it comes to our itihasas, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, there's a lot of morality, because these are, these great epics. They kind of teach us how we should live life, right? They teach us what is right, what is wrong. So that's in the Indian context, but it may not apply in the Greek context or some other context. So that's why context is important. So anyhow, I would say that on if you add up the merits and demerits of the actions of the two people that you're talking about, Hector and Achilles, overall, probably Hector was a better person, maybe more moral from today's perspective. But hey, that was a different world. Maybe Achilles was the guy, and he got the glory, he got the victory. At the end of the day, that's what matters in geopolitics and in history, because it shapes the outcome of history, the outcomes of history, and it shapes the future. Right, next question. Amisha says, why didn't ancient Egyptian wall paintings depict ancient Egyptians wearing winter clothing? Although modern day Egypt can get pretty cold in the winters. That's a good question. See, if you take a snapshot from the past 303 Ask Abhijit episodes, you will see me wearing a variety of different kinds of clothes. Sometimes I'm wearing something really warm, right? Sometimes I'm wearing a t-shirt. Sometimes I'm wearing something else. So you will see me wearing all kinds of things. But when it comes to Egyptian wall paintings, Egyptian wall carvings, you will see Egyptians wearing pretty skimpy clothing, right? A clothing that obviously is clearly suited to a summer kind of climate. Why is that so? Because you're right, Egypt can get pretty cold in the winters, no question about that. So why is it so? That's a great question. Yeah, this is how we should try and understand history, analyze history. So we have to understand this temple art in Egypt. These wall paintings, wall carvings, etc. Even the sculptures, these are typically, especially the paintings and carvings, these are in Egyptian temples and great Egyptian monuments dedicated to royalty, right? So this is ancient Egyptian art that has survived. So this art was idealized art. The objective of this art was to show the status of the people who are depicted in the art. Its objective was to show the values and religious context, religious concepts of Egyptian society. That was the purpose of this art, to show the status of the people who are depicted and to showcase the values and religious concepts of Egyptian society, the high values and high religious concepts of Egyptian society. The objective of this art was not to show daily realities, it was not to show seasonal changes. Okay, so that's why you will find this idealized depiction of people. So people, individuals with usually kings, queens, etc., pharaohs who are depicted in this art, and typically also servants and attendants and warriors, etc., you will find them generally wearing simple attire that's elegant but simple. You will see that the people who are depicted are generally young people. So the art emphasizes youth, vitality. It emphasizes royal status, or whatever status the people have, right? So that was the purpose of the art. It would not depict seasonal dress. It would not show any. It did not have practical purpose. It has this idealistic purpose, and this art, it was designed. It was meant to be timeless. It was meant to be eternal. It was meant to be ideal. Okay, especially in tombs where royalty and other people were buried. So if you see the art that is on the walls of tombs, inside tombs, you will see that it will generally show the deceased people, the dead people, enjoying a pleasant afterlife. So in that, you will show them young and vital and vigorous and happy and wearing nice, simple, elegant clothing, right? They will not be shown to be enduring the discomforts of cold winters with heavy clothing. That's the deal. But there is a caveat. Okay, let's go to our friend Google and let us Google Fayum mummy art. Check this out. So let's see this. Fayum mummy portraits. So the Egyptian wall paintings, etc., that we're talking about are the wall paintings that are from before the Greek and Roman periods in Egypt. Now let's talk about the Fayum mummy portraits. So this is from about 100 BC to about 300 AD. And over here you will find these are also Egyptian people, but from the Roman and Greek period, Greek and Roman period. And you will find that these people are depicted wearing a variety of different kinds of dresses, typically Hellenic or Roman style dresses. And some of them have pretty heavy clothing, definitely very different from what you will find in the pre Greek period in Egypt. So if you see the Fayum mummies, very interesting portraits, very realistic, lifelike portraits. And these people are depicted wearing different kinds of dresses, including potentially clothing you would wear in winter, right? And reconstruction, let's see reconstruction. So you can see what these people look like because the originals are pretty lifelike, right? As you can see, I mean, this lady could still be walking around the streets of Egypt. On this person too. So that's the deal. So the Fayum mummy portraits are very different, and they do depict potentially some Egyptian people in potentially winter clothing. All right, because the context was different. Shub 1405 says, compare pre-Christian Europe with Christian Europe in terms of women's equality, presence of social hierarchical system. Okay, pre-Christian Europe and Christian Europe. So historically, Europe was polytheistic. The people of Europe, all across Europe and all across Eurasia, India westwards, practiced different manifestations of the same culture, the ancient Indo-European culture, which all came from one place, whichever that place is. That's the Aryan invasion myth, right? And of all the different manifestations of Indo-European culture, the oldest that we know of is the Vedic culture. And it's obviously a polytheistic culture. And all these different European, parts of Europe, whether it's the Celtic regions, the Teutonic regions, the Slavic regions, the Nordic regions, whatever, they all worshipped gods that essentially had one-to-one correspondences with the old Vedic gods. So it was polytheism. And what kind of society did you have in Europe at this time? And what was the role and status of women in pre-Christian Europe, before Christianity was imposed on Europe, in terms of women's equality and so on? So first of all, when we talk about equality, let's understand that equality is a modern thing. Before I say anything, let me just make it very clear. I am in favor of equality of genders. Okay? Everybody should have the same rules and laws that apply to them, irrespective of what gender they are. There are two genders. Is that controversial? Should not be. There are two genders, male and female. And rules, laws, whatever, should be gender agnostic. That's what I believe in. Everybody should have the same rules and laws applying to them, irrespective of the gender. I hope I make myself clear. I am in favor of that. Now understand this. Historically, you did not have equality of genders. You had gender roles. Males would perform a set of roles in society, and females would perform a different set of roles in society. That's how it was across the world, including in Europe. So what kind of roles did women play in pre-Christian Europe? It depends on the place. So, for example, in Celtic societies, for example, what is now called the UK, before the Romans invaded, this place was entirely Celtic peoples. Even if you look at Spain or Western France, you had Celtic people there. Even Switzerland, right? All Celtic peoples and cultures. So in Celtic culture, there was the practice of matrilocality. When a man married a woman, he would move from his birthplace or wherever he lived to where the woman's household was. So what does that indicate? It indicates that women controlled property. And that's the kind of role they played. So women had property, they had property rights, they controlled property. And men were supposed to move to the woman's house, not the other way around. But these were not matriarchal societies. You had matrilocality, but not matriarchy. These were still patriarchal societies. Yeah, that's how it was. Generally, women, they had significant legal rights. They had the right to their dowry. So you had the practice of dowry. When a girl got married, her family would give. So even where you did not have matrilocality, where the girl would go to the husband's household, her parents would give her some gifts, right? That was called the dowry, to start off the new life. And even after marriage, the woman had rights to her dowry. So it was still her property, not the husband's property. And she also did not become the husband's property. Women, they held a high position in society as teachers, as healers, right? That was common across various pre-Christian European societies. So that's the kind of status women had in pre-Christian society. It was a pretty high status that women had. Then you had the introduction of Christianity into Europe. Starts with Emperor Constantine of Byzantium, and he has the Council of Nicaea in present-day roughly Turkey, and they amend the text of Christianity to some extent, and Constantine makes Christianity the official religion, state religion of the Roman Empire, and eventually Christianity overruns Europe over the next 600-700 years, and it is imposed on the people of Europe generally by force, through pretty brutal force, right? And then you have the Dark Ages in Europe, the medieval era, the Dark Ages era of Europe. So the position of women and status of women in society changes drastically once Christianity is imposed. What happens? So the church, it portrayed women as spiritually weak. It portrayed women as intellectually inferior to men. It portrayed women as the root cause of sin. And it portrayed women as being prone to sin, more prone to sin than men, because of this concept called original sin, right? So women were portrayed as temptresses, dangerous temptresses who needed male control. Okay, and this was done to justify the subordination, the legal subordination and subjugation of women, it was used to justify the exclusion of women from positions of authority. Okay, in the past, women could have very high positions in society before Christianity was imposed. But once Christianity was imposed, women became second-class citizens in society. There was this legal principle that said that husband and wife are the same person, and that person is the husband. Okay, and then you had the witch hunts. So see, Christianity was all about control. We'll discuss the witch hunts. So what was the structure of society during the Christian age in Europe? It was a rigid society. It was a hierarchical, pyramidical society, religiously sanctioned hierarchical pyramid. At the very top was a very small percentage of the population, the clergy. Okay, those who pray. Even in the clergy, you had a pyramidal structure, a military top-down command and control structure. At the top, you had the Pope. Then you had bishops. Then you had priests. Then you had monks, and you had nuns. And all these people, even though they had different levels of status and power, they were the most powerful, tip of the pyramid of society. The church owned huge amounts of land. It collected 10% tax from society. It's called the tithe. And it exercised enormous political influence. So that is the tip of the iceberg. Okay, the clergy. Below the clergy in European society, you had the nobility, the ones who fought. Okay, it was kings, and then you had the lords and barons and dukes and knights. These people, they controlled the land that the church did not control. And they also collected taxes, and they did military service, and they fought wars, and they exercised the judicial authority. They decided laws that were different from church laws, secular laws or whatever you want to call that. Right? So below the clergy, you have the nobility, including the king and everybody else. Then you have the peasants. So the peasants are about 90% of the population. And among the peasants, you have essentially slaves who were called the serfs or the villains, who were bound to the land. They were part of the land. They could not leave the land. And they were required to work on the fields of their lord. They were forbidden from leaving without the lord's permission, which would never be given. So they were essentially owned by the landowner, the serfs. They were essentially slaves. And you had a small number of people called the free peasants, who had a little more rights and liberties, but they also could not survive without giving service to various lords. So this is all the structure of the society. And you can see there's no women included in this, right? All the people with any kind of power are men. And that's how it was. So this is called the feudal system. And it created this web of obligations in society based on who owns how much land and who is part of which part of the pyramid. And each person owed allegiance to those above them in the pyramid. A rigidly hierarchical caste system. What did the church teach? It taught you, if you were European, that your social position was decided at birth. It is the God, it is the Christian God who decided your position in life, in society. Your position in society was divinely ordained. Social mobility was impossible. Don't even dream of it. If you dream of social mobility, you're questioning the will of God, not the gods. You're questioning the will of God, right? So this is very different from pre-Christian societies, in which you had a lot of social mobility, and women were respected members of society, right? So that's how it was. Your birth determined your station. Social mobility was impossible. It was essentially heresy to even think of social mobility. So the church had this enormous control and power over the entire population of Europe. Okay, it was the biggest landowner in Europe. I'll tell you what. In 21st century India, the largest non-government landowner in India is the church. I kid you not, right? So that's how it was. That is the difference between pre-Christian Europe and post-Christian and Christian Europe. In Christian Europe, women were second-class citizens. They essentially had no rights. They had no rights. And how did have things changed? Yeah, obviously things have changed today. Today, Europe is the defender. The West is the defender of human rights and freedoms and equality and all that. But let me tell you a small little tidbit of information. There is a nation called Switzerland. Beautiful nation, fantastic nation. Okay. So in India, we have states. In the US, we have states, right? Utah, Wisconsin, Oregon, and so on. In India, we have states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Assam, Telangana, Haryana, and so on. In Switzerland, you don't have states, you have cantons. Those are the divisions, state-like divisions within Switzerland. Switzerland itself is pretty small. So the last Swiss canton to grant women the right to vote was Appenzell Innerrhoden. Appelsen Innerrhoden. It gave women the right to vote in 1990. Until 1990, in the Swiss canton of Appenzell Innerrhoden, women did not have the right to vote. And the first time women actually participated in elections by voting was in 1991. Is this good? Is this bad? It's none of my business. It's an internal matter of Switzerland. They have the right to live whichever way they want. Others should stay out of it. Similarly, others should stay out of India as well, but that doesn't happen, doesn't it? Anyhow, that's the deal. So that's the difference between the rights of women and the status of women in society before Christianity was imposed upon Europe and after Christianity was imposed upon Europe. It was disastrous for women. And because women had such high positions and rules in society, like healers and teachers, that's why it was very important to destroy that right and those rights and that status of women, for the church to exercise complete control over society. And they did this by publishing a book called the Malleus Maleficarum, which was a bestseller in Europe for centuries. And what does Malleus Maleficarum mean? It means the hammer of the witches. It was a manual on how to identify women who are witches, what tests to perform upon them to prove that they are witches, and how to punish them for being witches. So one of the ways to test whether a woman was a witch was to tie heavy rocks to her feet or legs and put her in deep water. So if she floats despite all of that, then she's a witch, because this is magic. That's how you identify a witch. And if she drowns, then she was not a witch. How nice. Heads I win, tails you lose. And then if you identify a woman as a witch, then you have to obviously burn her alive after doing a tremendous amount of brutal torture and stuff. So mostly women will be burned. I think millions of women were burned alive. But today, academics will tell you only 20,000-30,000 were burned alive. In the 1980s, until the 1980s, 1990s, everyone knew that millions of women were burned alive as witches. But today, there's been academic revisionism, and now it's only maybe 10,000-20,000. That's what they say today. That's how you revise history, don't you? So women used to be burned alive, millions of them, as witches. And if you did not burn her alive, there were other ways of killing them. There was something called pressing to death. So you would place a woman on a hard surface like rock, and you would place heavy rocks on her chest and other parts of the body, and you will break the arms and legs first, and then the rib cage, and eventually she will suffocate to death. Pressing to death. Yeah, they had many nice, charming ways of punishing evil women who were consorts of Satan or whatever. Yeah, so that's what happened post Christianity, post the imposition of Christianity on the people of Europe. Right, okay. Next question. Amisha says, how were Jews treated during the American Civil War? Was anti-Semitism ever an issue throughout the conflict? Well, let's discuss the position of Jews in the United States overall. So there was this guy who was born in Boston Massachusetts, in the 17th century, 1600 something. Okay, he was born in Boston. His name was Elihu Yale. Elihu Yale. He was Jewish. He was born in Boston, but he lived in the US, present day US, only as a child. He spent the rest of his life in England and in India. He became an official, a high-ranking official of the East India Company, and as such, he plundered a tremendous amount of wealth out of our land, our people, out of India. And in 1718, he donated some money and some other stuff to someone who wanted to start a school or college in the United States. And because Elihu Yale was so generous in his donation, the person who founded that college, they named it Yale College. Today it is called Yale University, one of the most highly sought after Ivy League universities in the US. It was built from a seed funding of money plundered from India. That is Elihu Yale, who was Jewish. I am just stating facts here. It has nothing to do with his religion, by the way. I'm just saying that Jews had a high position in American society, right? In the 17th and 18th centuries. But anti-Semitism was definitely present in the US in different forms, shapes and forms. It had various ways of expressing itself. It had different intensities depending on the place and the time. The Civil War era is a very small era. Let's discuss a slightly broader era from the 1700s all the way to Second World War. Around that period, that gives us enough space to discuss this in some length. So Jews, especially those who were wealthy, had a high level of acceptance in American society. There was a synagogue that operated in Charleston in the 19th century, and so that was allowed, and nobody had an issue with that. So if you were Jewish and you were wealthy and you assimilated more or less, then there was no issue for you in some parts, or maybe many parts of the US. In the South, see, when we talk about the Civil War in the US, we're talking about North versus South. The North eventually won. North is Abraham Lincoln, and South is the ones who attempted to secede and partition the country. So the South was in favor of slavery. The North wanted to end slavery because of different economic models. For the South, it made sense to continue slavery because it economically made sense for them. So in the South, you had Jews who had assimilated into the local society. They adopted local customs and they held prominent positions, right? Some of them were plantation owners. Some of them were slave owners. Judah P. Benjamin in Louisiana, who was a high-ranking official in the Confederate government. He was a plantation owner, slave owner. He was Jewish. So you can see that Jews had prominent positions in the South as well as the North. During the Civil War, you had Jews fighting on both sides. And generally, there was not much anti-Semitism during the Civil War. There was this general, right, Ulysses S. Grant, who issued an order during the Civil War, expelling all Jews from his military district. It is in Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, that area. And he claimed that Jews were responsible for illegal trading of whatever, that sort of thing. But so Ulysses S. Grant issued this order expelling Jews, but Abraham Lincoln reversed that. So there was some anti-Semitism, but Abraham Lincoln was not anti-Semitic, you see. And then after the Civil War, you had Jews who would occasionally be excluded from various social clubs and resorts, sometimes even from universities. And they could potentially at times, depending on the time and place, encounter discrimination in housing, for example, maybe professional discrimination. Sometimes Jews were excluded from some hotels, from some clubs, from some residential developments. That sort of thing would happen sometimes. And in the lead up to the Second World War, anti-Semitic attitudes became more pronounced for a while in the United States. Henry Ford was kind of an anti-Semite. Okay. Um, and you had this organization called the Ku Klux Klan in the US, which was primarily a racist organization. They had this great hate for African Americans. They also targeted Catholics, but they also occasionally targeted Jews as well. So that was there. So in the run up to the Second World War, you had more anti-Semitism, and then I suppose later it became less pronounced. So that's been a feature of Western society, anti-Semitism. Jews have been persecuted for 2,000 plus years in Europe. They've faced all kinds of discrimination. They've faced massacres. They've faced all kinds of allegations of so-called blood libel or whatever. They've been accused of poisoning wells, and all kinds of conspiracies have been spread against them. There have been massacres of Jews in England, in other parts of Europe, and so on. So the Jews, they it's not something new for them, this sort of treatment, and they've also faced some of that in the United States, probably less than what they've faced in Europe. So overall, that's how Jews were treated in the United States. Not during the Civil War, but from the 1700s all the way to the Second World War period. And today Jews obviously have a better position, much better position in society, and Israel is kind of a favored nation of the US today. So things have changed. Napoleon Singh Shekhawat says, what was the objective of Nazi Germany during the North African campaign? And did Erwin Rommel really want to assassinate the painter Adolf Hitler? Let us go to the map. Nazi Germany. The North Africa campaign, right? Okay, let us go to the map and let us discuss the North Africa campaign in brief. Right. So we are discussing North Africa. How does it all start? It starts around 1940, roughly, give or take a few months or years. Okay, you can check up the exact dates. So it starts with the Italians invading Libya, and they wanted to go further east and capture Egypt, and potentially even go all the way to Ethiopia, because the Italians have an old history in Ethiopia going back to the First World War. So the Italians, they land in Tripoli, and then they make a move on Egypt, and then they are beaten back very badly. It was a disaster for Italy. But then the Germans, they decide to move in and support the Italians. Now, before we discuss the North African campaign, why did Germany get involved in this? Why they were fighting the Europeans, right? They were fighting England. Why did they have to make a move on North Africa? Well, there are good reasons for that. See, if Italy is your ally, and you control France and Greece, and then you also control, let's say, North Africa, then you control the entire Mediterranean region. And if you can make a move on Egypt and control the Suez Canal, that is disaster for England, for the UK, right? And if you can take over, let's say, the West Asia region, then that cuts off what the UK needs the most, which is energy, oil. So that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense for Germany to, if possible, take over North Africa, take over West Asia, take over the Suez Canal, control the Mediterranean, and deny the UK the oil that it so desperately needs. So that was the objective of Nazi Germany. So Rommel makes a move in support of the Italians. He also lands in the Tripoli region, and for a while he has great success. And he makes a move into Egypt, and he fights a few battles, and he wins those battles. And his campaign is going great. But then the British, under, what was his name? Was it Montgomery? Was it somebody else? So they then start a counterattack. And it's sometime in 1942 or 43 or wherever it was that eventually the North African campaign of Nazi Germany was derailed and defeated. So that is in very brief what I'm telling you, but obviously it took several years for this whole thing to happen. And Rommel was a brilliant general. He was called the Desert Fox, if I'm not mistaken. and he is considered to have been a great, very ethical fighter. He was not known for cruelty, or he was known as an ethical person. He fought war. He did fight a war, but he fought it along apparently ethical grounds. Now, in 1944, there was this plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And some of the people involved in the plot were kind of associated in the past with Erwin Rommel. That's why the finger of suspicion and potentially blame fell on Erwin Rommel. So he was, by the time he was back in Germany, and he was then given a choice: commit suicide. If you do that, then your family will not be touched, and you will be given an honorable funeral and all that. Nobody will be told that you were allegedly part of a plot. If you don't do that, then not only will you be executed, but your family will suffer consequences. So Erwin Rommel decided to do it himself, and that was the end of Erwin Rommel. Did he really want to assassinate Adolf Hitler? He probably did not want to do that. He may have wanted to remove Hitler from power, but not assassinate him. So even that is a matter of conjecture, whether he wanted to remove Hitler from power. But he was definitely not part of the assassination plot. But when an assassination plot happens, paranoia rises. And if you're Hitler, you want to take out anybody who could potentially have even a small chance of being associated with the plot. That's why Erwin Rommel, well, he met his unfortunate fate. Right. Amisha says, why is D-Day remembered as being such a pivotal moment within the Second World War? What does the D in D-Day stand for? What does the D stand for? It's, as far as I know, it only stands for day. So there is something called H hour, which is the hour at which a military operation will start. In that, H also means hour only. So D-Day meant, as far as I know, D meant day. I don't think it meant decision day or any such thing. It just meant day. Now, why is it remembered as being such a pivotal moment within the Second World War? Because it's where the West, which is the UK as well as the US, they made a landing in Normandy, in western France, on the coasts, on the beaches of Normandy. They were able to establish a toehold in Normandy, and then they were able to step by step liberate France and make a move on Germany itself. So at this time, Germany had bit off more than it could chew. It was fighting the USSR. It was fighting the UK. It had, it was occupied on so many different fronts. North Africa also, right? And the USSR was putting up a huge amount of resistance. It was slowly clawing back the territory the Germans had taken. It was beating Germany back. And then the Germany have to divert resources to fight off the Americans and the British, who have landed in Normandy and taking back France. So Germany was forced to divide its forces, and this eventually led to the defeat of Nazi Germany. So that's why the tide turns when the Americans and the British launched this invasion of Normandy. That's where the tide turned. And most of the fighting and winning was done by the Soviets, but in popular depictions, it is the Americans who win the day. So that's why D-Day is such a pivotal moment, because that is where the tide of the war actually turned. Nirvana Shank says, why did the Western Roman Empire fall in the 5th century CE AD? Despite maintaining advanced technology, infrastructure, and a large military for centuries, whereas the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire survived for nearly a millennium under similar pressures. Right. Well, there are several reasons. You may have the best military. You may have a tremendous amount of land. You may have tremendous wealth. But if your leadership is weak, none of that matters. Leadership makes as well as breaks empires. Over time, the Western Roman Empire, which is based out of Rome, its leadership became increasingly indulgent in luxury. It became increasingly corrupt. It became increasingly inefficient. There were internal power struggles. There was corruption. There was politics. There was degeneracy, let's say. Yeah, right. And when it comes to the Byzantine Empire, they had less of that. They also had geographical advantages that the Western Roman Empire did not have. So the Western Roman Empire, it had no natural defenses. It had the Rhine River, it had the Danube River. If you cross that, you could come and invade Rome, the Roman Empire, and they had multiple waves of invasions by the Visigoths, by the Vandals, the Huns, Attila the Hun, and so much more happened wave after wave of invasion. At times, even Rome fell to these invasions. So they did not have great natural defenses, and a lot of the population was concentrated in cities because that's where the wealth was, and there was a tremendous amount of inequality in society. The wealthy people, they would bring in slaves to work on the farms, and because of that, wealth was concentrated. It's in the hands of some people, a small number of people. There was a lot of poverty as well, but overall the empire was very, very rich, very wealthy. And then you had emperors like Elagabalus. What did I just say? Let me show you. Let's go to Google. Elagabalus. Let's Google this guy. Elagabalus. There we have it. Let us see what Wikipedia has to say about this fantastic person. So he lived between 204 and 222 AD. So he died around the age of 18, but he was a Roman emperor. Okay. His short reign was notorious for religious controversy and alleged sexual debauchery. Let's see, what can we find about this gentleman? So he was assassinated at the age of 18, okay, and he was replaced by his cousin. He had this reputation for extreme eccentricity, decadence, zealotry, and sexual promiscuity. One of the worst reputations among Roman emperors. He abandoned himself to the grossest pleasures with ungoverned fury. Elagabalus had nothing at all to make up for his vices, which are of such a kind that it is too disgusting to even allude to them. He was not a tyrant, he was incompetent, probably the least able emperor Rome has ever had. And modern historians, some of them will describe him as a tragic enigma, lost behind centuries of prejudice. Let's see what we can see about this fine gentleman. He married a Vestal virgin who was not supposed to marry, right? A flagrant breach of Roman law and tradition, which held that any Vestal virgin found to have engaged in sexual intercourse was to be buried alive. That sort of thing. Okay, nice. What else? 6-horse chariot and so on. He had how many wives? First wife was Julia Cornelia Paula. Then he had the Vestal Virgin Julia Aquilia Severa as a second wife. He divorced her, then took a third wife, was Annia Aurelia Faustina. Then he divorced Annia Faustina and remarried Aquilina Severa. Then this emperor Elagabalus had a husband who was Hierocles, an ex-slave and chariot driver. And he also married a man called Zoticus, who was an athlete. And this emperor, he prostituted himself in taverns and brothels. He may have identified as female. He may have been transgender. He may have sought sex reassignment surgery. He wore makeup and wigs. He preferred to be called a lady and not a lord. And so much more. Okay, so that's the kind of people who were ruling Rome. He was the worst, Elagabalus. He was the worst. And eventually he was assassinated by his own guards. To no one's great surprise, I suppose. Yeah. And then you had other emperors who were, not that out of the way, but who were pretty incompetent, and eventually, the Western Roman Empire just fell by the 5th century AD. When it comes to the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, their emperors were more competent. They had more professional standing armies. They were able to fight off their adversaries much better. They were better organized, better administered. They did not have all the weirdness that Western Rome had. And so because of these factors, the Byzantine Empire was able to survive until what, 14, which year, when, the 15th century, when the Turks took over. Rahul Dunake says, in spite of forming 25 million years ago, why hasn't the Lake Baikal turned salty? Why does it remain a freshwater lake? Great question. Let us go to the maps and we shall discover what is the deal with this lake. Lake Baikal. Where is this lake? It's in Russia. It's Russia, yes? So where is this lake? It's a huge lake. It's north of Mongolia. This is Lake Baikal. It holds about 20% of the surface fresh water of our planet. Huge lake. If you just roughly measure the distance from tip to tip, it's over 600 kilometers. Right? It's a massive lake. About 20% of the surface fresh water of the planet. And its greatest depth is more than 1.5 kilometers. So it's pretty deep. So this lake, it formed about 20, 30, 35 million years before today. How did this lake form? It formed because of tectonic events, because of the formation of a rift valley in this region, where you have two tectonic plates moving apart. So a valley forms, a rift valley. And over millions of years, it filled up with water, which is supplied to it by hundreds of rivers. Maybe not hundreds of rivers, maybe dozens of rivers. It's got all these little rivers that bring in this fresh water. And it has, I think, only one river, the Angora River or Angara River, which carries water out. So there is no sea near this river, and there is no connection between this river and any ocean, which is salt water. And all the water that comes into the river is produced by melting snows and ice, glacial meltwater mostly, which is why it remains fresh water. There's no salt. Amazing, beautiful. So that's the reason why this lake has not turned salty. That's why it remains a freshwater lake. What about a different lake? If you go to northern India, if you go to Ladakh, we have this lake over here. It's called Pangong, Lake Pangong. And if you go to this lake and you taste the water, it is salty water. So why is the Pangong Lake a saltwater lake, even though it's high in the Himalayas? And even though Lake Baikal is a freshwater lake, why is Pangong a saltwater lake? This one here. It's a beautiful location, by the way, Lake Pangong in Ladakh. So the deal is this. Let's zoom out. So the Indian subcontinent was once attached to Africa. It was once attached to Africa and Madagascar. And because of tectonic activity, the Indian subcontinent was launched by tectonic forces across the Indian Ocean. It was somewhere over Réunion about 66 million years ago, when you had the Deccan traps volcanism in India. And about 30, 40, 50 million years before today, the subcontinent slammed into Eurasia. And it is still slamming into Eurasia. And this collision happened with such incredible force that it threw up these gigantic mountains called the Himalayas, which are still rising. So just before the Indian subcontinent slams into Eurasia, there was an ocean between India and Eurasia, which was called the Tethys Ocean. And when the Indian subcontinent slammed into Eurasia, some of that water remained trapped between the subcontinent and Eurasia. And that formed all these Himalayan lakes. And that's why Pangong Lake is still salty, because it still retains the salt of that ancient ocean. And it has no rivers that take the water out. And it has no rivers that bring fresh water in. Right? That's why it remains salty. Whatever water comes into the Pangong Lake comes as a consequence of precipitation, either rain or snow. And whatever water goes out because of evaporation. There's no other means of the water going out. That's why Pangong Lake is salty. What about these two lakes here? Right? We have Mansarovar and Rakshastal. One second. Is this the location? It's obviously no, it's somewhere else. Let me see. Mansarovar. Mansarovar Lake. Okay, where is it? It's over here. Okay. So Today, if you look at the map, it will say some weird Chinese names, which is because we have allowed China to capture and occupy Tibet. So when it comes to the Lake Mansarovar, which is the large lake on the right of the screen, that is a freshwater lake. But right next to it, we have Rakshastal, which is a salty lake, right? So it's a big conundrum as to how this has happened. Because see, Mansarovar, it has some little rivulets that come into it and give it fresh water, and somehow it has been able to get rid of its salt content. But Rakshastal has not been able to do that. So it's one of the great mysteries. How come one lake is fresh water, the other one is brackish or saline? And I'm sure there's a good geological explanation for that, but I am not sure what it is. I've not looked into it. So anyhow, that's a bit about the geological history of the planet. Right, next question. Napoleon Singh Shekhawat says, I watched a video of yours in which you were talking about Yamnaya people being from the Indian subcontinent. But as I looked more into it, the internet showed me only 3 Yamnaya men being brown skinned. The rest of them had white skin with blonde hair and blue eyes. Why is that? Please enlighten. So let's go and replicate the experiment that Napoleon Singh Shekhawat has done. Okay, let's see. Google, here we have it. Yamnaya people. Let's see what these people look like. Let's see images of these people. So if you look here, you will see this Yamnaya gentleman looks brown skinned, dark hair, dark eyes, looks like an Indian. This gentleman looks once again like an Indian, and this gentleman looks very, very Indian. Standard brown skin, brown eyes, dark hair, right? But then you will see this person is depicted as a European, light colored hair, blondish hair. Then you will see this gentleman, and you will see other depictions of Yamnaya people who are depicted as kind of European. Let's see what other depictions we have. So these are all artistic reconstructions based on the skulls. Okay, so you can depict them whichever way you want. If you are an artist, you can depict them as a European person. You can depict them with whatever skin color, hair color, and eye color you want. So here is one example of a red-haired Yamnaya with white skin and blue eyes. It's an artistic representation. This gentleman has blue eyes and blonde hair and beard. So the artist decides how to represent the person, right? I mean, you could take me and you could do an artistic representation of me with blue eyes and blonde hair and white skin. In that case, I would look kind of European, I suppose, right? So that's what's been done here. Now let's go to, okay, let's check Wikipedia, what it has to say, okay? And why did I say that? See, I did not say that Yamnayas were from Indian subcontinent. I said that Yamnayas may have been from the subcontinent, maybe, and they definitely were not white people, is what I said. So why did I say that? Let's see what Wikipedia has to say about their skin color. Okay, skin. So based on genetic analysis, okay, first of all, Wikipedia is not necessarily a reliable source of information, but let's, for the sake of time, see what Wikipedia has to say. So there are some genetic studies that are referenced over here. People of the Yamnaya culture are believed to have had mostly brown eye color, light to intermediate skin, and brown hair color with some variation. Okay, let's see some more. A 2022 study by Lazaridis et al. Found that the typical phenotype among the Yamnaya population was brown eyes, brown hair, and intermediate skin color. None of their Yamnaya samples were predicted to have either blue eyes or blonde hair. In contrast with later steppe groups, which are not Yamnaya in Russia and Central Asia, right? So the Yamnaya people were a single genetically coherent group, and who were responsible for spreading Indo-European languages. That is complete conjecture. You can't prove or disprove that. That's nonsense. That's what David Reich says. I mean, that is pure conjecture. But the point is, none of them had blue eyes or blonde hair. They had intermediate skin color. What do we mean by intermediate skin color? White, black, intermediate. It's somewhere between white and black. That is intermediate. Okay, let's say we have no black people in Eurasia. So then it means that it's intermediate between white and brown. It means light brown. That is what the skin color of the Yamnaya people was, light brown. Not dark brown, not white, light brown. Okay? And they had brown eyes and dark hair, brown or black hair, maybe brown hair. You'll see plenty of such people in northern and western India. Maybe even southern India will find people like that. Many. So that's the whole point. Okay? An artist can make any kind of depiction of a person based on their skull structure. But that's an artist's decision. If an artist has a certain bias, he prefers the European origin theory of the Aryan race, so called, then he will paint the Yamnaya white with blue eyes and blonde hair. But what does the genetic evidence tell us? They had light brown. They had light brown skin, brown eyes, and dark colored hair. That is the deal. That's what we know. All right. Okay. Right. Next question. Shubh says, what are the origins of Rajputs and how did they adopt Kshatriya Dharma? And Elysian says, are Jadhav Rajputs in Maharashtra and Jadaun Yadav the same? Same with Chauhans and Chavan, Chaudhary and Chaudhary, Rathore and Rathod, Shinde Rajput in Sindhya, Panwar Pawar in Maharashtra. Please answer. I am Jadhav Rajput. My ancestors came to Maharashtra 400-500 years ago from Mathura, Karauli, Bayana. Okay, what is the origin? What are the origins of the so-called Rajputs? First of all, we have discussed this in the past, but this term Rajput did not emerge until the last 500-600 years. That's when the term Rajput appears in historiography, in written history. And this term comes from it means Rajyaputra, the sons of kings, which means people who had royal ancestry, right? But in 1000 AD, nobody called themselves Rajputs. In 1200 AD, most likely no one called themselves Rajputs, even though they are now called Rajputs. The Chauhans and whoever else, right? Whoever else. There are so many of these, not so many, a number of Rajput clans, lineages. So what's the origin of Rajputs? So if you read what the British and Europeans wrote about Rajputs, they will say that the Rajputs were of foreign origin. They were either descendants of Scythians, Indo-Scythians, but the Scythians themselves were of Indian ancestry, by the way. Anyhow, either descendants of Scythians or descendants of Huns. Who knows? Right? White Huns, Shweta Hunas, maybe that, maybe something else. So maybe foreign origin. But what does our own history, Itihasa, say? These kingdoms, which are now called Rajput kingdoms, they emerged in the aftermath of the breakup and disintegration and decline and disintegration of the Gupta Empire. So after the Gupta Empire, which encompassed the whole of the subcontinent, essentially, it declines and breaks up. Then you have these independent kingdoms that pop up. And they eventually come to be known as the Rajputs. But what were their origins? So the origins, it is said that there were 36 royal clans in India, or royal lineages in India that date all the way to the Mahajanapadas, but that is the late Vedic times. And those become the eventual Rajput lineages. So you have different ancestors, right? Surya Vansha, the solar dynasty, and their descendants, various Rajput lineages. Chandravanshi dynasties, the lunar dynasty, and their descendant lineages, which are different. And then there is Agnikul, which have come from fire, that sort of thing. So there are supposed to be 36 royal lineages in India. Let's see. And the English historian James Todd wrote about this. Let's go to Google and find out. What did James Todd write about this? So James Todd, 36 royal races of India, right? Something like that. What's it say? Royal races. James Todd was this writer. Let's see what this has to say. I'm sure it will have some kind of list that James Todd gave. And James Todd himself did not, create the list. He simply copied it from older records. So if we look at this, you are asking about the Jadhav Rajputs, right? So this is the catalog of the 36 royal races of India, which most likely originate in the late Vedic time period, and you have something called Yadu over here. As you can see, there is this one lineage is called Yadu, which could be the originators of the Jadav Rajputs of Maharashtra. Does it have any other Yadu Jadav thing over here? Joiha and Jetwa Jala, that's fine. Jeet. Okay, so it looks like there's only one Yadu Vansh apparently. So it looks like the Yadu Rajputs could be related to the Jadav Rajputs in Maharashtra. I'm not sure about Yadav and Jadaun and all that. I am not sure about that. Can't say for sure. And see, when you say Chauhans and Chavan, Chaudhry with the U and Chaudhry with the W, that's just English spellings. Those English spellings can differ. That doesn't matter. Rathor, R-E and Rathor, D, it's the same thing. It's different ways of writing the same thing. Shinde and Sindhya, the British called them Sindhyas. They were actually Shinde. I am not sure if they were Rajputs, if they were part of the 36 lineages, but they were Maratha warriors, right? That sort of thing. So I'm not sure about the Jadav. There is a Yadu lineage that was listed in James Todd's list. Is that related to the Jadavs of Maharashtra? I am not sure about that. Possibly, it could be, maybe, it may not be. I am not sure. I am not an expert in this matter. I only know about a few of these lineages, not all of them. But that's about the origins of the Rajputs. How did they adopt Kshatriya Dharma? They were Kshatriyas, right? They were warriors from the very beginning. They did not decide one day that, okay, now from today we will adopt Kshatriya Dharma. Not like that. It was their way of life. They were warriors. That was their role in society. Okay. We have so many other questions, but we have crossed 2 hours. Let's take one more question from the comments, then I'll take some from the live chat. So, Colorful Mix says, would you like to tell me about Indian classical music? Classical music was not just entertainment for culture like India and China. I'd like to know about the science and philosophy surrounding our classical music, how it came to be and its role in healing and meditation. Indian classical music, Indian music overall, it's the oldest musical tradition in the world that we know of. It dates back thousands of years, and it is based on something called the ragas. And what is a raga? Well, I don't have my guitar with me, otherwise I would have demonstrated that. I've done that in the past. But a raga is, see, in Western music, you have scales. Scales is a set of notes. Sa re ga ma pa dha ni sa, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. These are the 7 notes of the standard scale, of the heptatonic scale, the major notes, right? So the Western system, it comes from India, because the system of ragas with those 7 notes, it predates Europe by thousands of years. It predates Greece by thousands of years. So we have scales in Western music. It could be heptatonic scales, 7 notes. It could be hexatonic scales with 6 notes. It could be pentatonic scales with 5 notes, that sort of thing. In Indian music, we also have scales, but we have more than scales. We have ragas. What is a raga? We have, there are, I don't know, hundreds of ragas you could create. And the ragas are classified into something called thats. And this classification was done roughly 100 plus years ago by a gentleman called Bhatkhande. So we have ragas classified as morning ragas, evening ragas, night ragas, afternoon ragas. We have something called raga Bilawal, which is a that. It's a classification of ragas. Bilawal, it's an Indian name, not a Pakistani name. It's a morning raga. We have raga Kalyan, which is an evening raga. We have raga Khamaj, which is a night raga. We have raga Marwa, which is a that, which is a dusk raga. Very, very, different kind of. So each raga, it evokes a mood, an emotion. And based on the emotion, you classify it as, and the rasa of the raga, which is the emotion it evokes. You can classify a raga as a morning raga, or evening raga, night raga, afternoon raga, or a seasonal raga like Malhar, which is monsoon, and you have raga Vasant, which is springtime, that sort of thing, right? So that is what ragas are like. And I suppose this form of music, this classification of music emerged in the, well, at the very beginning of Indian civilization. Over time, it evolved over time, over centuries, over thousands of years. That's why it is so complex, and it's the greatest system of music that you have anywhere on the planet. But it's dying a slow death in India because everyone's enamored with Bollywood music and Western music today. But the greatest system of music is Indian classical music. So raga, I'll tell you what a raga is. I told you it has a time: morning, night, evening, afternoon, whatever. It could have a season based on the emotions it evokes. A raga, its structure, its note structure, it has an ascending scale and a descending scale. So a set of notes when you are going from lower frequencies to higher frequencies, and a set of notes which when you're descending from higher frequencies to lower frequencies. And the ascending and descending scale can potentially be different from each other, which is totally different from any concept in Western music. Then each raga has a sonant note and a consonant note. A sonant note is the note that you emphasize the most out of all the other notes. And the consonant note is the second most emphasized note. Then you have drone notes. So when you are playing raga, let's say on a sitar, you also have a veena that's accompanying you in the background. And the veena, it will be tuned to 3 notes. And those are the drone notes. And that goes on in the background. Ding, ding, ding. You keep plucking that. And by playing this kind of music, it can create an atmosphere, a mood, a set of emotions. Each raga has a personality of its own. And each raga is typically associated with, each of the major ragas is typically associated with a particular specific deity. For example, Raga Bhairav, which is a dawn raga, which you play in the early morning when the sun is rising. That is generally associated with Lord Shiva, right? And other ragas are associated with other gods. And there is, each raga also has a pakad, which is a distinctive melodic phrase associated with the raga. So ragas, I mean, it's the most incredible system of music, and you can play ragas on modern instruments. You can play ragas on piano, on electric instruments. You can play ragas on guitar. I've done that. I would love to reconnect with my musical roots. So, and it obviously, some ragas have, hypnotic, it can put you in a hypnotic trance-like state. Some of them can be good for meditating. Some of them are said to be good for healing, and so on. So it's a very deep and profound subject. I can't explain in 5 minutes. Maybe I should have a musician come and talk to me about this, have a conversation. Maybe I should revive the podcast just for that. Let's see. We'll see about that. Okay. That's the last question from the comments. Let's see some questions from the live chat if we have any. Okay, I see that we have 3 super chats. Let me deal with those first of all. UMX says that, is it true that anyone west of Persia was called Mlecha Yavana in ancient India? It meant that they were foreigners and who were considered outside the realms of Vedic Dharma, a word similar to kafir? No. What did Mlecha mean in the Indian civilizational concept? The word Mlecha was the opposite of the word Arya. In our context, the Indian civilizational concept, the word Arya meant noble, civilized, and Mlecha meant uncivilized. So it essentially meant whoever was no longer following the Vedic lifestyle, the precepts of the Vedas, that person was called a Mlecha, irrespective of race, skin color, eye color, hair color. It had nothing to do with your race or ethnicity. If you had blonde hair and blue eyes, but you practiced the Vedic lifestyle, then you were an Arya, not a Mlecha. So those who had moved away from the precepts of the Vedas, they were called Mlechas, including our own people who had migrated to Central Asia and wherever else. So that could potentially include Persians when they moved away from the Vedic lifestyle, right? Yeah. And Yavana, what does the word Yavana mean? It means Ionian. There's something called the Ionian Sea. Let me show you what is the Ionian Sea. Okay, let's go here to the map. Where is the Ionian Sea? Okay, let's find the Ionian Sea, shall we? So here we have the Ionian Sea between Greece and Italy. So the people who lived in this region were called the Ionians, and we called them the Yavanas. All right. So Yavana means Greek essentially. It has nothing to do with this term kafir or whatever the hell that is. Nothing to do with that. Right. Next question. Sumit says, please write elutive book on Indian history timeline. I'll put that on my to-do list. Maybe it is already there on my to-do list. Well, thank you for the suggestion, sir. ICMBs says, are ex-US colonies faring better than French ones? Well, the UK colonies, who did the UK colonize? India, Australia, etc. Just these two. Also West Asia, Middle East, Egypt, and so on. But let's talk about India, Australia. So overall, if you look at these countries, they're doing better than the countries the French colonized, which are the countries in the Sahel region, Africa, and so on. Those were devastated. So I'm not sure it's because the British were better than the French. I'm not sure about that. It's because we were more resilient than the poor African people who were devastated by the other Europeans, the French. That's what it means. So please don't mistake it to mean that the British were better than the French. No, they had the same objectives. They had the same method, essentially. They employed the same methodologies for occupying and plundering, but the effect was different. We were more resilient. That's why we rebounded, and we are in the process of maybe rising again as a great power. Africa was totally devastated because they perhaps were less resilient. I'm not sure. Right? So that's the deal. Okay, let's take perhaps some questions. Okay, I will not. Please stop taking super chats. This is not a super chat live stream, but I'll take the super chats which are already there. Akshit Raj says, I'm a new subscriber. Well, thank you so much, Akshit. Welcome. And I'm glad to have you as a subscriber, sir. I wanted to know about your views on David Reich's AMT. You can call it whatever you want. Aryan invasion theory, which is AIT, or if that doesn't work, invasion doesn't work, well, let's call it a Aryan migration theory. If migration doesn't work, we'll call it tourism theory. If tourism doesn't work, we will call it picnic theory. This is a bunch of nonsense. Okay, and I have entire Ask Abhijit live streams dedicated to this Aryan invasion nonsense. Okay, and I don't say it's nonsense because I am emotional about this and I hate this. Before 2016, I used to believe that there was an Aryan invasion of India. I used to believe it. But then one day I said, let me look into it. Let me look into not what people are saying, not what historians are writing, but let me look at the actual evidence, the hard evidence, archaeological evidence, literary evidence, genetic evidence. And when I spent a few months looking into it in great detail, I discovered there is no evidence whatsoever that supports an invasion or migration or tourism or picnic of India by some white-skinned Aryans. Nothing. And I have entire episodes dedicated to the Aryan invasion myth. What is the episode number? I can look into that. Maybe I can. If you want to know my views in detail, we can look into that. So let me see. Let's look at my channel, and let's see, where is this episode? Which episode is that? Let us see. Live stream. This one, 43. Aryan invasion, migration, tourism, picnic. That's the one. So check out that episode, in which you will find exactly what my views are about this matter. And now I have more live super chats people are taking. Please, let us end this live stream soon. Okay, let's see. Dheeraj says, one last question. The Westerners and Americans really believe that they are the modern day descendants of the Roman Empire and civilization. We can see that in their symbolism. Is there any truth to that? The Romans, their descendants are the Italians. No one else. The Romans did occupy much of Europe and even North Africa, and they may have left behind a little bit of their genetic material there. Happens. That way, everyone is related to the Romans, right? If you look at northern and western India, you will have lots of people who will have maybe 1% Greek ancestry, maybe 3% Scythian ancestry, maybe 2% Kushan ancestry. That way, everyone's related to each other. Genetically, everybody is related to each other, and most people in Europe will have a little amount of potential Roman ancestry. But are they civilizationally carrying the legacy of the Roman Empire? Well, then you would ask yourself, was Rome a civilization or an empire? It was an empire. It was not a civilization. Okay, Greece was a civilization that the Romans conquered, and Greece lost its sovereignty 2150 years ago. It has never regained it. So the Americans are not modern day descendants of the Roman Empire, which was not a civilization. They are the descendants of the not the Anglo-Saxons, the English, who are a combination of three races. The people of the UK, let's say the English, they are a combination of three races. One, the Celts, the Celtic people. Second, the Anglo-Saxons, who invaded and conquered the island in the middle of the first millennium AD. And thirdly, the Normans, who were originally of Nordic origin. These three races mixed and gave rise to the modern day people of the UK, mainly the English. The Americans are descendants of those people. Of course, they've absorbed other ethnicities now. But which civilization is the West a descendant of? None. None. The West is an empire. If you want to call it a cohesive entity, it's an empire. Because Christianity was not a civilization, it itself was an imperial system. And the West was not in any way a continuation of ancient Greece. They destroyed everything that Greece stood for and imposed Christianity on top of that. So they can't claim descent from Greece. The Romans can legitimately claim connection to Greece because they absorbed Greek culture and made their own. The Romans did. But the Romans were polytheists, and Christianity is a repudiation of everything polytheistic. So how can you then claim that you are a continuation of Rome when you hate polytheism? Right? So they see it's all about acquiring some of the prestige without acquiring the polytheistic and idolatry practices of the Romans and Greeks. So we want the prestige associated with Rome, but we don't want the evil polytheism. We don't want the evil idol worship. That's the deal about the West and the United States. UMX says, aren't non-Muslims of any race called kafir? Well, the Muslims will call non-Muslims kafir. What does it have to do with us? What's the argument here, sir? The mlecha thing, that is nothing to do with any kafir nonsense thing, okay? That's a totally different thing. The mlecha, like I explained, mlecha means non-Arya. Arya means noble and civilized. Mlecha means someone who has moved away from the Vedic way of life. It has nothing to do with the Islamic concept of kafir or whatever. You may see some parallels in that. I do not. Okay? Okay. I can now see that there's some thousands of questions that people have here. Let's take maybe a couple of these. Neeraj says, our textbooks say that we had pre-classified occupation based on caste, but Peshwa Bajirao was a warrior despite being a Brahmin. Please do not believe anything your history textbooks tell you. They are lying. They are distorting our history. We had various kings who were proud to be of Shudra origin. Shudra did not mean something bad. And you had social mobility in India. Like you have pointed out here, Peshwa Bajirao was a Brahmin, but he decided to become a warrior. Life decided that he has to become a warrior. So he became a warrior. And through his deeds as a warrior, he became a Kshatriya. That was the deal in India, in our civilization. We had social mobility. We do not have that rigid, horrific caste system that I discussed earlier, the Europeans had. That was based, your station in society and life is divinely ordained by the God, by the one Christian God. And if you question that, if you try to be socially mobile, you are committing a sin against God and you must be burned alive. We do not have any of that. Right? So if your textbooks are telling you that we had some that sort of thing, your textbooks are lying to you. Everything that is today considered to be self-evident truth is based on colonial atrocity literature to make you hate your own ancestors and to be ashamed of your own culture. That is the objective. Okay. Mhm. Amisha says Devdutt Patnaik says Chanakya is an imaginary person in his recent article. Well, that's his opinion. And I do not take Mr. Patnaik seriously. And neither should anybody else. That gentleman has a very, very clear agenda. He is a disciple of Wendy Doniger, who wrote that horrific book about the Hindus. So that explains what kind of gentleman Shri Patnaik ji is. So I do not take him seriously at all. And yeah, that's all I can say about Mr. Patnaik and his opinions. Right. Okay. Geopolitical versus control, SAR control. I shall control. Yes, thank you, sir. Chaitanya says eyewitnesses claim that 2611 shooters were white or foreign looking. Even JK that said there were more than 10 terrorists. What are my thoughts? I have not looked into this. So I cannot say anything about this. Can't say. Pax Schild says, who are the most diabolical in history? French, Spanish, English, Third Reich, Turkic invaders, caliphs. I would say the most diabolical in history were the English and the Turkic invaders. Okay. Okay, let's take this one last question for today. Feline Lover says, Hyksos people who invaded Egypt actually the Scythians? Are the Hyksos actually the Scythians? And could Hyksos be a corruption of Scythians becoming H? A lot of Hyksos names do sound more Indo-Aryan than Semitic. I'm not sure about the Scythian angle. The Scythians were obviously Indo-Iranian people. Their names were very much, in sync with Indian and Persian names. Apabhransha names they had, the Scythians. Partatwa was one of their kings. It sounds very Sanskrit, doesn't it? Could the Hyksos be Scythians, S becoming H? Well, the term Scythian is a term in the English language. The true term is Shaka. That's what we called them. That's what the Persians called them. The Persians called them Shaka, not Scythians. The Indians, us, we call them Shaka, not Scythians. It's an English word. The Egyptians, if they had known the Scythians, they would either have called them the Shakas or some Egyptian word. They would have not invented an English word and used that, right? The English language that is spoken today did not even exist 2.5, when was that? 3,500 years ago. Right? So it's not possible. Now, so the Hyksos names, many of them do sound more Indo-Aryan than Semitic, no question about it. Their way of life, their way of warfare, all of that looks very Indo-Aryan. The kind of bows they used, the kind of weapons they used, the bronze axe, the parshu, the chariots they used. They had one Sarthi and one Maharathi. The javelin, the god they worshipped, a god of thunder and rain. Everything sounds very Indo-Aryan. But the consensus among scholars is that they were Semitic people. So what can I say? That was okay. We have one more super chat, which I shall take. And this is going to be the last question of the day. Even if there are more super chats, I won't be able to take them today. So this is the last question of today. Devil X says, do you think our textbooks will change, showing the true history after India becomes a major $10 to $15 trillion economy? I have no idea. It depends on the leadership, not on the economy. The leadership must have political will to change the nonsense that is being, you know, imparted in the name of education. That has to happen. But maybe leadership, if we become a 10, 15 trillion dollar economy, maybe the leadership will also be different, perhaps. So it will depend on the leadership, not on the economy. But economy, leadership are also interconnected. So I'm hopeful this will happen. But why hasn't it already happened in the past 10 years? What has prevented this government from doing it? I don't understand. I'm sure they have bigger things to worry about. I'm sure, no question about that. But this is also important. It is poisoning the hearts and minds of our own people, of our own youngsters. Our youngsters are not evil people, but they are being brainwashed into hating their own culture, their own civilization, their own ancestors. Right? It needs to change. But there isn't any political will today. Hopefully, I'm hopeful. I'm an ever optimistic person. So hopefully, when we are a 10 to 15 trillion dollar economy, things will change. I hope so. I hope so. Let us all hope and pray to the great gods, including Shri Indra, for that. All right, people. Thank you so much for this live stream, for all the questions. And there were so many great questions that you all asked in the comments. I think I'll have to do more extra additional live streams about history to cover all of those. But I'm going to end this here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. It is great to be back on the Ask Abhijit show after a break of a few days. And tomorrow we're going to have a live stream about geopolitics. It's going to be a super chat live stream. I look forward to seeing you all there tomorrow. Until then, take care. Keep asking questions. Keep learning. Keep raising your standards. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.